Other Mateists. So the second part of the Dharma wheel is footwork, and I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I wanted to talk about it. While cutting down a tree in my backyard, I had the realization on some of the hip movements, and I thought that was a breakthrough, but I now realize I was kind of going in the wrong direction, and I kind of want to throw out my thought process. The movement of the Dharma wheel itself is, you have your hips turning to a 45 with that first hand movement. So the hips turn, and that drives the hand forward. You then push forward with the left hip, kind of a figure 8 movement with the hips, but it's forward and then out again. And that is the driving footwork. Now, when I was cutting down the tree, or cutting down the limb, I noticed, I could push with my right hip, pull back with my left hip, get that kind of deep stance working. And I thought, oh, maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's one of those things if you're pushing off with the back leg, you're pushing that right hip forward. And what I realized is that gets the body mechanics wrong. It's not illegitimate, but that's not what this particular movement is trying to teach. So try this. So you stand at your Wuji, and then turn your right hip to the left, and let that bring the hand over, provided you practice the hand work. If you don't, you can just start with the hips, that's fine too. And then let the left hips, kind of snap back, like one goes forward and then it pulls the other one back. And then when the right hip pulls back, push forward and step with the left foot. And that kind of brings you off at a 45. That brings me, facing this way. And what clued me in is the fact that the next movement, you then continue the circular movement of the hips. The left hip starts going, and then it pulls the right hip back, so now I'm perpendicular. I'm now going to the, at a 90-degree angle from where I started. I started facing this way, I go off this way, and now I'm looking directly to the right of that. So it starts at a 45, and then comes back to face 90 degrees to your original position. If I follow my original idea of push off with the right foot and then turn in, I'm actually only facing a 45. So it's going from one 45 to another 45, and that's not how the set is supposed to go. It's supposed to be 45 and then 90. Just the turning of the hips, please try this yourself. And if you can make it work, fine, but I think that has more to do with your hip flexibility than the actual body mechanics. The pushing off and then the turning, I'm trying, and I'm not, I can kind of pull it to 90, but that's really stressing my left ankle. If I push forward with the left and then pull in, I'm easily 90. If I get that same level of stress, I can actually go even further. So it's not about getting that leg twisting, though if you, with a lot of Shaolin background, you do get a lot of twisting of the muscles. So that doesn't mean you can't practice that, but for the principles of power generation, and that's what I learned this technique is trying to teach. So if you have a lineage where, no, it is about twisting, by all means, follow that. But notice the difference of your right hip pushes forward and then pulls back, and that pushes the left hip forward, and then continue that turn and let it pull the right hip back even further to 90. You'll feel the difference if you push off with the right and then try to pull. It's different bodily mechanic wise. And when I was, working with the saw, I could feel, oh, here's power generation. I can feel the power. And if you have a heavy bag, try them both. Or not even a heavy bag, just something like a pad or something you can practice with. Try that. Try that, whip versus push off and then twist. The whole circle movement, I feel, generates a lot more power. But if you find differently, go ahead. Listen to your body. But these mental concepts and principles are important, and my understanding is those are things that are hidden in the design of the set and how they teach it. So the way I was taught is you turn the hip, and granted, this goes beyond the practicing of the taulu, practicing of the kata, into the jiben, the key haunch of it. So you do 1, 2, and then you practice again 1, 2. So you kind of practice this sweeping movement driven by the figure 8 motion of the hips. So all you're doing really is letting your hips draw a figure 8 on this kind of 45-degree line, and letting the hand motions be driven by that movement. And that is part of the Dharma wheel, or I should say the grindstone, as I learned it originally, as turning the grindstone. This is turning the grindstone, and this is turning the grindstone. Like that's in a circle, in a circular motion or in a vertical motion, like a 2D, like a 2D plane. This is the Dharma wheel in more of a 3D plane. But I've had other teachers who've said that's actually more part of the next movement, which I'm just going to add in here, of after you throw out that palm, you pull that hip back and then bring the hand in line in a Buddha palm. So you go out this way and then turn back in, and you have the right hand at the hip and the left hand in front. The next move is more of a dedicated separate move, so I'll cover that in a different video. But this transition of turning the hips, so pulling the hip back from the Dharma wheel, I always saw as a part of the Dharma wheel and an expansion of the Dharma wheel. So you can practice out that way, pull in, practice out that way, and then pull in. You can practice that way, working the Dharma wheel on both sides, and really you should. And it's just that the driving of the hip forward brings the hand around. The other hand snap movement pushes the other hand out, and then you just pivot again, and it's the same turning of the hip, bringing the hand around, and you just extend out again, and just practice going back and forth until it's fluid. And it's the movement of the hips driving the hands at its base. The extra power comes from the fact that as this hip pushes forward, it's driving your weight forward also. So it's not just, standing in place and moving the hands. It's you push forward with it. So the minimal effort, maximum efficiency principle of judo, that general exercise has a few movements where you're supposed to stretch the arm and then see where your body kind of gives, and then you develop kind of drop power from that. This is not drop power, but it is kind of the same sort of driving power that you might see in karate. So if you have those movements where you bring the leg in and then spring forward linearly, it's the same principle as that. But instead of bringing the feet together and shooting out linearly, you're kind of shooting out circularly, so that you get, instead of this, you get that. You get a more bladed body at the end and more reach because of it, at the expense of some power. Or I should say, of some structure. It's actually taken me a while to kind of like piece all this together, and in the meantime, I've also picked up some Tantui, and practicing the Tantui is what helped me put this together. So I might also put up some of the Tantui lines, but this is a bigger thing for me because this is a dedicated power generation movement as I was taught. And getting that principle aside, I thought, okay, yeah, there's the movement, but what's this move really about? It's about generating that power. And when I look at this particular set of movements, going out and then pulling back in, it's kind of an expansion and a contraction. And I did do some practice in that vein of expand, contract with essentially the equivalent of the Kihon. But it was not explained in that way. It was not explained as you're just getting that circular hip movement of effectively on both sides. It was a matter of what you did on one side, do it on the other. It didn't have that kind of... It wasn't that explicit, and I wanted to make it explicit. So give that a try. You now actually have 2 movements to practice. So give this a try again. Any other questions, you know where I am. Till then, keep your teacups empty.